Dear friends, so we continue our series of qualified talk, and here with me today is a very interesting personality. Welcome, Charlotte.
Hi.
Just to explain why she is in particular very interesting from the point of view of legal career, 'cause she's kind of in between England and Wales and Hong Kong, right, Charlotte?
Yes, that's right. So I originally grew up in Hong Kong. I went through the schooling system here. I went to university in the UK to study my LLB. And then it was upon, finishing my law degree and doing the back schemes of, law firm placements that you usually do in your penultimate year. I got offered a place at Allen and Overy in Hong Kong, which meant that I had to then convert my UK law degree to a Hong Kong conversion. So how that route works is you take your LLB from the UK, you come back to Hong Kong, you sit a series of conversion exams, and then you go on to the LPC equivalent, which in Hong Kong is called the PCLL. It's a postgraduate diploma in laws, and it's basically the exact same thing as the LPC. So I went that route. I qualified. I did 2 years training contract. And then after a few years of being qualified, I decided that, with my UK law degree, it would kind of make sense. I'm working for a UK firm to get dual qualified as well. So I took the MCT, I passed the MCT, and then I took the SQE2. So a very curvy, different route to dual qualification.
So that is why we have so many questions to you. Just to clarify certain things. So this actually means that people with LLB from the UK, they can go to Hong Kong and then have additional kind of LPC, which is called postgraduate certificate in laws, something
Correct.
like that.
Yes.
And after that, you still need to have this 2 years of training contract, right? But what about from the point of view of your legal studies, how different it was, this application of the law to the facts, this sort of things doesn't resemble with something you study in Hong Kong?
Yes, they're actually very similar legal systems. So Hong Kong was actually a UK colony until 97. So the whole basis of the legal system here is pretty much exactly the same. So when I took my conversion exams from after doing my LLB, you have to take 7 in total. So there's things like evidence, constitutional law, property, those types of main topics. And the only areas where there's a significant difference is constitutional law and property law. And that's just because of the way that Hong Kong land works. There's no freehold land in Hong Kong. It is all leasehold. And it's mostly apartment buildings. So there's no real plots of land. And the law had to adjust for that difference between the UK and in Hong Kong. The other thing I would say is that despite the legal systems being very similar in terms of legal improvements or legal changes to the legal system, it's very slow in Hong Kong. It takes a lot longer to change legislation, and cases that happen in the UK, the courts say they hold weight in Hong Kong, but they're not legally enforceable. So if there's an outcome or obiter dicta or whatever that a judge says in the UK, it holds weight here, but they can't rely on that for legal arguments per se. And in terms of the job that I did, so I was in private M&A, the law is exactly the same. The documents that I would draft, whether it was Hong Kong or English law, everything would be pretty much the same. It would just be the governing law clause that was different. You would have specific drafting points in the boilerplates that would go to certain case laws, etc. And that would be the same in both Hong Kong and England.
Most of the contracts you worked with, are they still governed by English law? It will be Hong Kong law.
So I do both, and I actually did both before I was dual qualified. So the way that it works is with a lot of the deals that I did in Hong Kong, there would be many, many jurisdictions, usually between at least 5, between 5 or more, and they would pick a governing law for all of their documentation. More recently, they've turned more to English law because Hong Kong has kind of got a little bit of a strange political situation at the moment. So people are just erring on the side of caution and using English law or Singapore law. But yes, they would be majority the same. And I would review both and I would draft both because the partner that I work under is also dual qualified. So long as he signs off on the English law before I was dual qualified, we would be safe on a, from the SRA or from the Hong Kong Law Society. But that's basically it didn't really matter. We could change halfway through the deal what the governing law was because it didn't impact the documents very much.
So it's pretty important for Hong Kong qualified lawyers maybe to top up the qualification with such additional qualification as Solicitor of England and Wales.
Yes, I would say so. I would say it's a very, very helpful skill, especially when you're working for bigger firms that are more international. A lot of the times you will use English law as your governing law. Yeah.
And how helpful was your training and then subsequent working for your SQE qualification?
Oh, it was very, very useful. I think I didn't really have to think that much about the soft practical skills. It was more about ticking the boxes for what they wanted to see in the exam. So it was more about leveraging on learning the exam technique rather than needing to learn all of these soft skills that you need as a lawyer. For example, going into a client interview, having the correct tone of voice, the correct like soft skills like that all came pretty naturally to me because I've been doing that for quite a number of years now. And it was more just saying the right things and in the right order in order to get the marks that I needed to get. So in short, yes, very helpful. You kind of skip all of that revision and you just focus on, the specific legal issues and exam technique.
Great. And how have you in general terms prepared for the SQE2 exam, and maybe a few tips for candidates in general terms and maybe for those who are coming from the Hong Kong jurisdiction?
Yeah, sure. So actually a lot of people who come from the Hong Kong jurisdiction wouldn't need to take SQE2 now. They can just take the SQE1. But if like me, you do better in practical exams and you pass the MCT, then maybe this is the better route for you. But that was just, for my case. I prepared using OSCEsmart, obviously. I leveraged a lot on the past papers and the mock exams. And I actually, for each of the oral aspects of the exam, I actually ended up writing my own template. And then basically memorizing that template, but then in the exam, identifying the legal issues, recalling those, and then just fitting them into my template. So in the prep time that you have before you have your client interview or before you go into, to present or make your submissions to the judge, you have all that prep time. And as soon as I sit down, I write down quickly my template, and then I fill in the gaps as I read through the past paper or the actual exam questions. So mock exams were really helpful for me because, as I said earlier, it was more about learning the exam technique and less about, to be honest with you, I still use the notes and memorize the actual legal application, the legal facts. But luckily, because I had done an LLB, I did conversion exams, and then I did my PCLL. It was very still ingrained in my brain. So I didn't really find that I needed to focus that much on really memorizing the law. It was kind of still in there. I got lucky, I guess. But doing the mock papers and the actual face-to-face mocks with the OSCEsmart team is really helpful in tweaking the exam technique and getting really good marks.
You mean the mocks with individual feedback? Because now on the market there are so different mocks. Imagine how you can handle interview with a piece of paper. Just when you have to actually make inquiries and they actually withhold the information too. You think practice is the most important. If we compare it with the actual reality, what you face in the actual practice, to which extent, obviously it's artificial because it's an exam, we can't expect it to be 100% there. But from your perspective, for people also not to have any expectations, or they can balance them, to which extent is it similar to the actual things which you do in practice?
So I would say that the mock exams, the face-to-face mock exams, are actually harder than what I actually experienced when I was taking the exam. The only things that was slightly different was obviously the preparation time, because you can't really, when you prep for the mocks you're prepping on your own, you're prepping in a at your desk, and then you're doing the face-to-face mocks through your computer. So the prep was actually quite different. And for example, with the client interview, you have to write an attendance note at the end, and you can attach the notes that you make during your prep to your attendance note. And it actually, if you write your prep and you write your questions in a way where you have space to write down the answers from the interviewee, that makes it so much easier to follow. So when you attach it to your attendance note, you can refer to it. Oh, question 1, this was the response. Question 2, this was the response. So when you're writing your list of questions for your interviewee on those pieces of paper, don't be afraid to ask for more note paper, and just write your question and leave like 5 or 6 lines so that as you're interviewing, you have space to write and you're not constantly flipping through. That was kind of the most practical thing I would say that's different, because obviously at home you can write whatever you want, wherever you want. And the feedback that you get is mainly, face-to-face feedback on how your performance was. But if you want to make sure that you get all of the marks, then you should do that. You should organize your prep, and so when you ask questions, it's all in like a very easy to read format, and it saves you time in rewriting it all in your attendance note.
So you recommend to make it as per exam conditions, at least one of the mocks, so you can feel the difference. The thing is, the mocks are useful not only from the point of view that you can check on your knowledge, because it's a little bit harder than in the actual exam and we cover more things, but also to elaborate those small things, which are very personal, if you should leave spaces, so maybe you should use a separate piece of paper. This is all very, very personal. And preparation of your own materials, when you do anything, especially in handwriting, involves so many memories. So this is something you did as well, like you were talking about the templates that you've used. Amazing. Just in general terms, did you feel like written part was harder than oral part?
Yes, for me, the written part was harder because that was obviously all written. The exam conditions were actually quite stressful. I took them in a test center in Hong Kong, and it was really stressful. It was, the whole process of getting prepped to go into that computer lab to take your exams was all very stressful. And also I perform better in practical exams, whereas this was very much essay based or practice, the drafting was fine. It was more like essay questions, and it required a lot more of recalling legal knowledge and application, etc. And the past papers that I did were very useful, and obviously a lot longer than the actual exam. So that prepped me to make sure that I never left a single question unfinished during my actual exam, which I was scared of when I was doing the past paper mocks, just because there were so many legal issues. I wanted to make sure that I covered them all. So again, the OSCEsmart mocks are actually harder and much more extensive. So if you're making time, when you're setting your time and you're timing yourself when you actually attempt those mocks and you're addressing all of the legal issues, you should feel relatively confident that you'll cover all the legal issues during the actual exam, because there are fewer than in the mocks. At least that was my experience.
Yeah, that's for training purposes, though. You mentioned past papers. Do you mean CILEx past papers, or what sort of past papers do you mean?
Yes, so I referred to the CILEx past papers that were in the notes and referred to in the OSCEsmart materials. And basically I would, after I did a few of those, that's when I attempted the actual mocks with OSCEsmart, because going through the problem questions gets your mind into that mode of identifying what the legal issues are, and then you can start practicing structuring your essay answer from that. So I would suggest doing problem questions first, and then the past paper the practical mocks. Yeah,
great. So those are like past exam papers from CILEx. CILEx, this is like chartered executives, a little bit different route to qualify in England and Wales, not as a solicitor, but as a chartered executive, slightly different, but very close to solicitors. Maybe will be soon regulated by the Solicitors Regulation Authority. So you can find them if you Google CILEx past papers, level 6, I think that would be appropriate level. Oh, thank you very much for all those tips. And now I want to swap to a little bit different topic related more to legal career. When you eventually reach this qualification and you are working for one of the best law firms on this planet, and you've decided to make a break in your legal career, tell us a little bit about that and about why you made this decision.
Yeah, sure. So originally I qualified in Hong Kong in 2018. I qualified. I started my training contract 2016. And during that time, I was actually playing full time for the Hong Kong national lacrosse team. So I was training at night, working during the day, logging back in after training at night. And the team was really supportive of it. And basically, throughout my whole career, that was always an important part of my life. And to maintain that, I guess, ability to play at that level at a sport was quite important to me. And I knew that, and my partners knew that with me starting work to begin with. And obviously, you make sacrifices as a lawyer. You're sacrificing a lot of your personal life and your personal time for the job. And I would say that having something outside of your job is so important to longevity. And in my case, I actually took a 12-month sabbatical a couple of years ago to play at the World Championships in 2022. So it was a really, really good experience. I came straight back to work, refreshed, ready to work really hard again. So I did another almost 2 years, and then I kind of had a bit of an itch more recently to go back to school and study something else. So what my plan is now, so my last day was only 2 weeks ago. It was very bittersweet, and it was quite scary to make that move, but I'm going to go back and do a master's in a psychology conversion, followed by a secondary master's in industry and organizational psychology, with an aim to eventually go into consulting for law firms in how they can better retain talent, better the workplace environment, increase profitability. Because a lot of law firms now, and I'm not sure who will be watching this, whether or not they're working in these firms or they're working for organizations, but for firms, they base all of their profitability on their lawyers billing in 6-minute increments. And a lot of the time, especially when you're giving quotes to clients, they find it difficult to, accept, okay, are you sure you worked on this piece of work for, 12 minutes? How do I know you didn't go to the bathroom in that time? It's a very interesting way of tracking billable hours, how much you should be charging for particular work, etc. And there's a lot of studies done recently on how this should change. And all of this really excites me. It really interests me. Also from a sports psychology background, because I also am an athlete. So thinking about all of these things and speaking to my partners who I've worked for many years now, very openly about these interests, they basically encouraged me to go, and they said, it'll be really helpful for us if you come back to have these skills to be able to help the legal industry in a different way. So I'm not sure if I'm going to go back to being a lawyer, but I'm definitely not leaving the industry as a whole because I've spent 8 years there. I love it very much. I think that the skills that I learned from my law degree, my qualifications, my work, etc., are extremely useful. And the way that you learn how to solve problems and deal with situations as a lawyer are very different to my non-lawyer friends. So all of these skills are very transferable. And I know that it's not uncommon for people to get, to feel a little bit like they've got itchy feet and they want to change careers and do something different at some point, because law can be quite a demanding industry for the long term. So it's an exciting new chapter, and I am hoping that it works out.
If we summarize, so you actually want to work with the talents, like you want to grow a new generation of lawyers, and at the same time you mentioned about this way to count billable hours, which may be kind of reformed to a better way. So if we put it together, would it be something like human resources? What is it?
A little bit. So with industrial and organizational psychology, basically IO psychology for short, the industry aspect of it is more about people and fit for the industry. So one of the arms of that is human resources. So picking talent that fits the job, that thinks that you can do it long term, for example. The organizational side of IO psychology deals with how you can have so say, for example, how you can have remuneration set so that the people who do work for you are incentivized and motivated to continue to give good work product, for example. So it's more about the individual's behavior and the science behind that in order, and setting your policies within your organization in order to get these people to do what you want them to do. So put those two things together, you have IO psychology, and there's many things that you can do with a background in that. You can go into human resources, you can go into executive coaching, you can go into management, for example. All of these things are possible. My plan is actually to just go into consulting, which means that I would go into law firms, do a deep dive into what their issues are, what their turnover rate is, etc. Look at the business as a whole. And on one hand, you can look at the reforms of, you know, how billable hours work. And on the other hand, you can also, you know, tell law firms how they can change their specific culture or their policies in order to retain talent longer term, or to make more people want to make it as partners. So those are the two main areas that I'm really interested in. So we'll see where it goes. But I think there is a gap in the market as well. There's a growing want, especially in junior lawyers, for the workplace to be a healthier, more satisfactory place. And I think that's really great. A few generations ago, I know of senior female partners that I had worked for who, you know, they literally just gave birth to a baby and are checking emails. And those times are hopefully behind us now. And people are much more aware that in order to stay in this long term, to make partner, to have a long and healthy career in law without turning to, you know, vices such as alcohol or sleepless nights and being really unhealthy in the long term, the law firms kind of need to change a little bit. So that's where my interest is. I really want to make sure that it's a profession that is sustainable and is healthy for people if they want to be in private practice for big firms doing transactional work.
So I'm turning us back to the SQE2 simulations. In the light of what you said about the soft skills, I think this is a good approach. This exam already elaborated, like we can develop them, because you can't teach it. You can only develop it by doing, yeah? So we can create a range of practical interviews and exercises by means of which we can train solicitors, junior solicitors, or already qualified solicitors to hone their existing skills, either in how to handle the client when client has certain issues, because that's what is in SQE2. You might have a difficult client, or in very time frame manner to communicate your arguments to persuade the court and things like that. So I think this exam is a good model for this kind of training that can be arranged in the law firms.
I agree with you. I think SQE2, you have obviously your client interview, which gives you the soft skills or helps you develop and realize what the soft skills needed are. You know, your submission to the court, which is also a different set of skills because it's a lot more formal. It's more about thinking quickly on your feet, being able to present information orally in a very structured way, which is different because a lot of lawyers, you know, we sit at a desk, we can backspace, we can copy and paste our submissions in writing. So that's a different type of soft skill. The attendance note as well, all of these things require certain ways of thinking that you don't learn in your law degree, in terms of structuring, in terms of answering questions, dealing with difficult people. The client interview as well, if it's wills and probate, you know, they're always going to be somewhat upset, or there's going to be some sort of family dynamic that the client doesn't want to talk about. So you have to think of certain ways to, one, show emotion, but also as a lawyer, you're not a therapist, right? You're not there to comfort, you're there to extract information to help them solve their problems. So you can't come off too harsh or too distant. But at the same time, you have to say, I know this is painful to talk about, but please, can you let me know if any of these things exist in your situation so that I can see the full picture and help you solve this? So you're kind of you are a third party. You're not there to hand them tissues or pat their shoulder, but you're there to help them solve their issues. So it's that delicate balance in learning and doing these mocks and taking the SQE that I think are actually very useful for when you go into practice. There's going to be situations where you go into a room and you're there with you and your client and opposing counsel and their client. And the two clients could be at each other's throats. You know, they could be arguing. It could be very tense. It could be, you know, litigious, whatever it is. As lawyers, we can't we can't then go at our opposing counsel's throat. That's not how it works. We're held to a different standard. So being able to also maintain that professionalism, but also not seem like you're going against what your client is saying, is a very difficult soft skill and balance that you have to learn. And I think the SQE kind of gets you a little bit there. It teaches you kind of that ability to manage your own emotions in order to be objective. Yeah, I agree with you.
That's very important point which you brought, the SQE2. Even people who are exempt from this assessment might actually reconsider, because it provides a great feedback, like detailed breakdown with all the skills and all the marks. And if you struggle, you may just not, being qualified as a solicitor doesn't mean you'll have a job. You know, there's something which can actually show to your potential employer what you can do under the conditions of stress, because that's the exam, right?
Oh, definitely. I would say that if you are an already qualified lawyer and you've worked for a few years, the soft skills in SQE should be somewhat developed just based on your work experience already. But if you're coming from, law school, you've done an LLB, you are not going down the training contract route and you're going through the SQE route, I would say the SQE2 is actually quite useful in terms of learning those skills, because although you may think, oh, in the LPC we did something similar, we had to make submissions to a judge, or we had to do pretend client interviews, etc. You haven't done them under these conditions, and it's very different, especially in the real world, when you're thrown, say for example, you have a meeting with a client and the partner says, I can't make it, Charlotte, go by yourself. In those situations, which happen far more often than you think, you need to be able to hold your own, have those skills. And if you've done it in an exam situation like the SQE2, you could have the most difficult client in real life.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So as to your future career, wherever way it's going to go, remember we have a white label platform which can be used for numerous law firms to create their own law schools. Great. My last question, very quickly, but I can't avoid asking it. So you are a real professional sportsman. You play for the national team of Hong Kong. How much is the importance of sport in your career? And in general terms, in your opinion, how important is it for lawyers also to pay attention to sports and similar things?
I've spoken a lot about having something outside of work that keeps you sane, basically, and helps with longevity. I think the reason why sport is so important is because it's purely based on the effort that you put in. So unlike a lot of other hobbies, sports has a lot of benefits in terms of it's healthy, you're getting outside. If you play team sports, you're meeting people outside of law, which helps immensely to remind you that what we do as lawyers is not normal. It's really helpful to have people outside of the industry that you're also friends with, which is why team sport, very important. 3, I think it's the things that you learn from team sport, putting the team ahead of yourself, sacrificing for the greater good of whatever your team is trying to achieve. Those types of lessons, it doesn't really come up that much in our industry, but they're great skills to have when you are working in a small team and say someone's going on annual leave and you have to cover them. You're less bitter about it because you know that it's for the greater good and they'll do the same for you when you're on leave, for example. The other important thing, I think, is that it gives you opportunities to increase your sense of worth and confidence outside of the workplace. So a lot of the time, especially as a junior lawyer, you are not going to draft things perfectly. You may have a partner who is really, really particular, or you may have a senior associate who is just a really stressed out person. And so day in and day out, when you're spending 12, 14, sometimes 16 hours in the office, and you have these people berating you, or you have so much stress from clients, they're calling you left, right, and center, having something that boosts your confidence and that you're good at and that gives you a sense of purpose outside of the workplace is so important. Because if your sense of self-worth is purely based on the feedback that you get on your drafting or how you've dealt with a certain situation, you are just going to crumble. There's so much time that you're spending in the office working that if you know, if I had nothing else outside and I made a mistake at work, for example, say, you know, when a client rang me 10 times, I wasn't at my desk. And so they called the partner and they were so upset that we weren't being responsive or something like that, right? If that was the only thing that I got as feedback during that whole day, it would make me feel terrible, like I was incompetent, that I was, you know, even if it wasn't my fault. And a lot of times that just doesn't lead to a long and healthy career. It leads to you losing your confidence. And once you lose confidence, your work product suffers even more because you're then doubting yourself, triple doubting yourself, for example. So having something, it doesn't have to be sport for this type of skill or this type of benefit, but just having something outside of work that gives you a good sense of purpose, that your self-worth comes from, other than being a good lawyer, I think is very, very helpful for the long term.
Oh, thank you so much. I think your change in the career is very right idea, because even when you comment on this element as to the sport, you completely link it to the same idea, making this professional happy, which will make the clients happy and the firm happy. Thank you so much for today's amazing qualified talk. I think it will it's useful for many candidates from Hong Kong and England. And welcome to the role of solicitors, and welcome to our Smart Lawyers Club as well. We have a small community where we assist and help each other with different matters. So, and hope to see you soon in Hong Kong then.